What if there was a substance that could create a younger, more beautiful version of yourself? In the film The Substance, a fading star accepts this seductive proposal, but when two versions of herself compete for space in the same life, the question is no longer who she wants to be, but who will be eliminated first. We begin the film observing a star on the Walk of Fame, going through all its stages, from its inauguration to its complete oblivion, showing that time is relentless for everyone. Next, we see Elizabeth Sparkle having an exhausting day of work on television, dedicating hours to dancing in front of the cameras, encouraging women to exercise on the program Sparkle Your Life. When the show ends, the presenter decides to go to the bathroom, but since the women's bathroom is under maintenance, she ends up using the men's bathroom, which was right in front, thinking it wouldn't take long. But while she is in one of the booths, the producer of the program enters the room, talking on the phone with his secretary. He expresses his desire for a new, attractive young woman to replace Elizabeth, arguing that awards or recognition were irrelevant, since her advanced age was driving away the show's audience. According to him, the actress is no longer as attractive as she once was, having passed 50. Sometime later, the producer invites Elizabeth to lunch at a fancy restaurant, with the intention of explaining the situation and his departure from the scene. However, while he eats repulsive food, he cannot bring himself to say the same horrible words he said in the bathroom and leaves the restaurant when he sees a rich friend. Completely shaken by the cowardly way in which he was fired from the show he had hosted for years, Elizabeth returns home. Upon seeing her face being removed from a billboard, she suffers a car accident, but fortunately, Elizabeth was not injured and is released by the doctor after a quick evaluation. However, contrary to the doctor's wishes, a young and attractive nurse examines the TV actress's spine, states that she is an ideal candidate and gives her the coat so that she can leave. Without understanding anything, Elizabeth leaves, and when she reaches into her pocket, she finds a flash drive with the inscription, "The Substance," on it, wrapped in a piece of paper with the message, "It changed my life," which leaves her completely perplexed. Suddenly, an old acquaintance named Fred appears and starts a conversation, complimenting her beauty, even after so many years. Initially, she does not remember him, and even after remembering, she does not show enthusiasm in seeing him. However, without realizing it, he asks her out and gives her his number so that they can meet. Even though the sheet of paper falls into a puddle of dirty water, the man simply picks it up and gives it to the TV star. After this meeting, Elizabeth returns to her elegant apartment, which is full of pictures of her from the time when she was a sex symbol for all of television. After admiring the view of the city, the woman decides to watch the content of the flash drive that was with the note. After all, it was something that could change lives. And in fact, the flash drive contained a video about the substance, which was a type of compound capable of increasing cell production to such a high level that it would create a new version of itself, younger, stronger, and, in essence, superior, as if it were a younger clone of you, apparently conscious. The plan after consuming the substance is to alternate 1 week with the original body and another week with the new body, forming a perfect balance, with the only condition being that you cannot forget that you are the Matrix, and you and your copy are one, and there is no way to escape yourself. After discarding the video from the flash drive, Elizabeth goes to a bar and returns home feeling ill. When she looks in the mirror, she doesn't seem to like what she sees, because, for people who have always been concerned about their appearance, the arrival of old age can be torture. It is precisely this feeling that makes her remember the substance and call the number written on the flash drive. As soon as a man answers, she gives her name and address and says that she would like to order the substance, which he accepts, and it is scheduled that she will pick up the product at a certain address. Thus, at dawn, the woman fulfills her morning routine and sits down to have breakfast while reading a newspaper. The problem is that, in this newspaper, there was an advertisement for her replacement, which only deepens Elizabeth's discouragement. The good part is that she receives an access card with the number that allows her to pick up the substance. Without wasting time, she goes to the indicated address, a very old and dilapidated place in an alley. Despite this, it has a very advanced control system, and the inside is clearly a premium environment, made for high-end clients. However, without paying attention to this, Elizabeth simply takes the package that was in locker 503, which is her identification number, and returns home. When she gets there, she opens the package and sees a complete kit with needles, vials, and a type of parenteral nutrition, in addition to the materials needed to apply the substance. The instructions also indicated that it could only be activated once, that it needed to be stabilized every day, and that the exchange would happen every 7 days, without exception, always remembering that you and the copy are one. After that, she goes to the bathroom and looks at her aged body in the mirror, which makes the narrator's voice echo in her mind, saying that she is the matrix of everything, that everything comes from her and that she is one, and that this new body is just an improved version of the person herself, making it very clear that there can be no distinction. Without hesitation, Elizabeth prepares a dose and injects it into herself. Initially, nothing happens, but suddenly the effect takes hold, and she falls to the floor, writhing in pain. Bizarrely, her 2 eyes turn into 4, and a completely new body is expelled from her back. Minutes later, the new Elizabeth wakes up feeling strange and goes to look in the mirror, discovering herself in a completely new body, beautiful and full of youth, with the sensation of having the substance running through her veins. After admiring herself for a while, she remembers the step-by-step instructions and goes to her original body to sew up the huge hole it had in its back, and inserts the kit into its veins to serve as food. After all, you can't just leave a bleeding body lying there. At the very least, it needs to be fed. So, after a somewhat confused night's sleep, the new Elizabeth wakes up the next day and goes about her morning routine, admiring her own young body. However, while she is in front of the mirror, her nose starts to bleed and her head throbs incessantly, reminding her that she needs to stabilize herself every day. So she takes the stabilizing kit, uses a syringe to collect the fluid that was in the spine of her original body, and then injects herself with one of the 7 capsules of this fluid, which actually makes her body return to normal. Then, the woman sees a flyer advertising an audition to recruit the newest presenter for the gymnastics program that the old Elizabeth starred in. And of course she decides to participate. Sometime later, she arrives at the show, signs up as Sue, and immediately impresses the judges with her body, which was very well highlighted by the gym clothes she had bought earlier. And since she already had experience in this field, it didn't take long for the woman to be called to meet with Harvey, who says he loved her audition. The guy wastes no time and tells her straight out that he loved the young woman and that she is being hired. After all, she is beautiful and happy, exactly how people like her. And even though the girl says she needs to go away for a week to take care of her sick mother, the producer says he will still find a way to make her a star. In this way, several days pass, and Sue enjoys her life as the next star of the television show, training and enjoying her youth. All this while feeding and taking care of Elizabeth's body. Then, a week later, the feeding liquid runs out, and she needs to transfer it to the new body, which happens through a blood transfusion. As soon as she wakes up, Elizabeth eats a real meal, takes a nice bath, and the next day, she goes to the studio. When she gets there, she is greeted by Harvey, who gives the woman a box with his things and a souvenir, saying that it is in honor of the many years they worked together and that she should do this in her free time. So, Elizabeth goes home, marks on the calendar the days that she and Sue will take turns being awake, and also goes to get the refill kits that were delivered to locker 503. All the woman does for the rest of the days is eat, watch TV, and take care of the young woman's body, until it's finally time to take turns once again. Sue doesn't plan on staying still and decides it's time to create a separate space to hide the bodies when it's time to change, so as not to leave any human bodies lying around the house. So, she uses her next few days and opens a hole in the bathroom wall, which ends up making a lot of noise and bothering the neighbors. Oliver, one of the neighbors, shows up knocking on the door, ready to complain about the noise, but the guy quickly changes his mind when he sees that the neighbor is not Elizabeth, but an attractive young woman named Sue. In fact, the guy says he's there to help whenever the girl needs it, but since he doesn't want to talk nonsense, Sue slams the door and takes Elizabeth's body to the new little room that was made in the bathroom. And during the days that she was awake, you can see that Sue changed the pictures that were around the apartment. After that, she finally makes her debut on television, hosting a fitness program as the newest star of Pump It Up. And this debut is praised by everyone on the show. At night, Sue goes out with friends to have fun and celebrate, and seeing that Elizabeth's food was running out, she tells the original to hold on just a little longer and that she'll be back soon. But even squeezing the food, the time the young woman managed wasn't as long as she wanted. So, a few hours later, when she returns home with a guy, her nose starts to bleed, showing that the change needs to be made. However, as she wanted to continue enjoying the night, she runs to the bathroom, grabs one of the used refills that were in the trash and does the stabilization process, which should only be done 7 times, which somehow gives Sue a few more hours of fun, not to mention that the guy says she was prettier than before. She continues making out, but when the guy opens the zipper on her back, all her organs fall out on the floor at once. Like in a nightmare, Elizabeth wakes up the next day. When she goes to the living room, she sees the mess that Sue had made during the night. Along with it, the woman sees a note from the guy from last night, saying that he left the motorcycle there because he was very drunk. The problem is that when she goes to get the paper, she realizes that her finger has aged, as if it were several years older than the rest of her body, a situation that terrifies Elizabeth and makes her go to the bathroom to try to wash it and see if it can solve the problem. When she sees that it didn't help, the woman looks at her back and realizes that she was pierced more than she should have been, since the needle hole hadn't healed yet and was inflamed. So she doesn't waste any time and calls the organization that distributed the substance to explain what happened and ask for a way to undo the aging caused by Sue's carelessness, who used a few hours more than she should have. But in response, the man says that what was used on one side is lost on the other, that is, it can't be reversed. And then the man says that there is no she, and that they are just one. As soon as she ends the call, Elizabeth decides to clean the house and watches the new Pump It Up on television, starring the young Sue, which doesn't seem to please her very much. And then, out of nowhere, Oliver starts knocking on the door wanting to talk to the young woman, but Elizabeth just ignores the weirdo. Then, sometime later, she receives a notice that the refill kit had been delivered to the warehouse and she dresses in different clothes so as not to be recognized when she goes to the location, which seems to work and she gets the refill without any problems. However, before heading home, she stops at a small restaurant to have a coffee while she cools off. Out of nowhere, a man starts talking to her, saying that 7 days are really long, and on top of that, he drops his identification number and subtly shows the cut on his back to prove that he is part of the experiment. Not only that, but he was the one who introduced the substance to her, because this man is actually a handsome nurse who treated her several weeks ago. Elizabeth doesn't pay attention at first, but soon changes when he says that over time a person becomes lonely, thinking that this part of her no longer deserves to exist and that it would soon be corroded by her younger self, something that has already begun. And knowing this, Elizabeth runs out of the restaurant, terrified, and returns home, where she runs into the boy who spent the night with Sue and showed up to retrieve the motorcycle. Completely shocked by what has just happened, Elizabeth returns to the apartment and looks for Fred's number. So she calls the guy and arranges to meet him for a drink that night. And even though he is completely in disbelief and in shock about what is happening, Fred happily accepts, almost as if it were a dream come true for him. So the night finally arrives and Elizabeth is all dressed up for the date. The problem is that she looks at Sue's body and the young woman's billboard and starts comparing herself to her younger self, making her feel totally oppressed and inadequate to the point of ruining her own makeup and sitting in the dark while eating in her room, ignoring all of Fred's messages. Sometime later, the day of the change finally arrives, and Sue goes to the studio for another day of recording. But in the middle of the dance, something seems to move under the skin of her buttocks, forcing her to stop recording and leave there embarrassed and nervous, especially knowing that the producers were checking the footage because they had seen something bizarre. When she gets to the dressing room, the young woman grabs what was under her skin and removes it in a very disgusting way through her belly button, discovering that it was a chicken leg. Luckily, at that moment she wakes up, since it was all a dream. When Sue wakes up, she realizes that Elizabeth has stuffed herself as much as she could and one of the things she ate was a whole chicken. And this ends up being the last straw for the young woman, who calls the supplier of the substance and says that the experiment is not working. But all the man says is that there is no distinction between the two. After that, Sue arrives at the studio and sees that there was only one person from the production team packing up the rest of the things that were left. This guy tells her that the show was canceled and that Harvey wanted to talk to her right away. Luckily for her, it wasn't anything bad, because the producer just wanted to tell her that everyone loves her and that she will have the opportunity to star in the special end-of-year show, which will take place in a few months. So, because she is busy with her promotion, the young woman completely ignores the deadline for the exchange and stays awake several days longer than she should, completely ignoring the fact that the wound made by the needles was getting infected in a terrible and disgusting way, because all that mattered to Sue was her new glamorous life. And then, as soon as she finally wakes up, Elizabeth is furious when she realizes that she looks decades older than she actually does. So she calls the supplier and tells him that Sue is not respecting the balance and continues to steal more and more time from her life. In response, the man says that Elizabeth could stop the experiment whenever she wanted. After all, she is the matrix of everything. The only problem is that Elizabeth would never go back to being the way she was before her lifespan was stolen. Even so, she decides to continue the experiment, even knowing that she will be drained until she dies. In this way, Elizabeth continues her life trapped in the apartment and in a decrepit body that can barely stand to get up from the couch. While watching TV, Elizabeth sees the book that Harvey gave her and discovers that it is a cookbook, a book that she uses to make all the recipes at once in a rather bizarre way. Elizabeth is surprised when an interview with Sue starts to air on the television. During the conversation, the young woman seems to be constantly belittling Elizabeth, talking about the difference in their generations and that she has never seen her predecessor's old program. This makes Elizabeth so angry that she throws eggs at the television and at the glass to block Sue's view of the billboard with a few sheets of newspaper, and also leaves her distraught and in a tailspin, hitting her head on the bathroom floor. A few days later, Sue finally wakes up and sees the mess that had been made in the apartment, with food everywhere and newspapers covering the glass. At that moment, Sue decides to take drastic measures. The girl fills several glasses with stabilization fluid and completely ignores the exchange period with Elizabeth's body. Then, one night, 3 months later, less than 24 hours before the end-of-year show, Sue is at home with her new partner when she goes to collect more stabilizing fluid from the actress' body and realizes that all that was coming out was pus, since the liquid had run out. Feeling that the exchange would not last much longer, the girl immediately calls the supplier to ask for help. But the man says that all she needs to do for the fluid to regenerate is sleep, so that her main body will generate more fluid while she is awake. At that moment, her nose starts to bleed and her time is running out. She drags herself to the bathroom and does the exchange against her will, because it would be better than fainting or even dying in the middle of the apartment. But this exchange ends up being a bit noisy and wakes up the girl's boyfriend. The guy goes to the bathroom to check if everything is okay. Luckily, Elizabeth manages to get to the door first and lock it. At that moment, Elizabeth sees herself in the mirror for the first time in 3 months. Due to so much time being drained, she has transformed into a hideous, aged and deformed creature. The guy starts banging on the door, yelling for Sue to open it, which irritates Elizabeth, causing her to scream in a scary voice, making the guy run out of the apartment. But she ignores all this and calls the supplier, warning him that she wants to stop immediately. So the next day, she puts on as many clothes as she can to disguise herself, runs to the storage room, grabs the kit capable of ending the experiment and returns to the apartment. Once there, she carries Sue's body to the living room, carrying it quite easily. Without caring about anything, Elizabeth prepares everything to end the experiment and sticks the syringe into Sue's body. But while injecting the fluid into the girl's body, she sees a note saying that everyone will love her performance at the end-of-year show and gives up on the plan, because that was always her dream, and only the young woman would be able to make it come true. However, the liquid had already been injected, and Sue's body was slowly being destroyed. With no other options, Elizabeth begins to transfer her own blood to serve as a stabilizer, which works in a bizarre way, and Sue suddenly wakes up. Without understanding what was happening, the two look at each other in fright, until the young woman notices the syringe with the word, Terminator, written on it lying on the floor and understands that Elizabeth was trying to get rid of her. In a fit of rage, the young woman violently attacks Elizabeth, who manages to escape and lock herself in the bathroom. However, the young version is very strong and breaks down the door with a few kicks. With nothing to stop her, Sue attacks Elizabeth in the most brutal way possible, hitting her head against the mirror repeatedly and kicking Elizabeth in the chest, sending her flying several meters until she falls onto a glass table in the living room, where the beating continues, at least until she realizes the painful truth that the two are one. But it was too late to turn back, and the end-of-year show was about to start. So, Sue gets herself together and goes to the studio, very upset. The problem is that during the preparation she starts to feel sick and has to run to the bathroom. When she gets there, Sue notices that her teeth were falling out on their own, removing them without effort. But since she still has to go on stage, she closes her mouth and leaves the bathroom, and on the way there she runs into Harvey, who introduces her to several rich old men who run show business. Luckily, the poor thing manages to please them with a fake smile and is released to go on her way. So, without wasting any time, she takes the elevator, without making it clear that her body was falling apart, and runs back to her apartment as quickly as possible. When she gets there, she grabs the bottle that contained the rest of the substance and applies it to get a better version of herself. The problem is that the substance could only be used once, and since this was the second time it was being used, what is born is a completely distorted, bizarre and disgusting creature, with several heads, one of them being Elizabeth's face, eyes, mouth and breasts, something truly disgusting to look at. However, since she still has to go to the show, the monster, Elisa Sue, gets ready again, putting on a dress, earrings and everything. But as a final touch, she cuts out the painting of Elizabeth Sparkle and uses her own face as a mask. After all, the two are just one person now. With everything ready, Elisa Sue returns to the studio, where she is well received by everyone who applauds, saying that she was born for this and that the show will be unforgettable, which in fact never happened, since it was all in her imagination. Despite this, she somehow gets past security, moves forward and enters at the exact moment the show begins to be broadcast. The problem is that her body is so deformed that the creature can't even speak properly into the microphone, a situation that gets even worse when the mask falls off and one of her mouths vomits a breast in front of the entire audience, causing a terrible commotion and public outrage. Without wasting time, several men go up to Elisa Sue and start beating her, calling the creature a monster. One of them even uses an axe to destroy her head, but the head regenerates and the monster throws blood into the audience, who runs away in despair. After the bloodbath, Elisa Sue runs out of the studio, but her form was so badly formed that her leg shatters, causing Elisa Sue to fall to the ground and break into several pieces, leaving only Elizabeth's head, which in a bizarre and frightening scene, breaks free from the remains and goes to the Walk of Fame where the star that Elizabeth Sparkle received when she was younger is located and dies right there, remembering her glorious times. The substance shows the cruel price of the obsession with youth and fame. Elizabeth tried to cheat time and became her own worst enemy. In the end, all that was left was the tragedy of someone who couldn't accept the passing of the years. If you liked the video, leave a like, comment what you thought and subscribe for more analyses. See you next time.